Welcome to the Exponential Australia Church Leaders Podcast.
Well, g'day Exponential Australia. It's so great to be together as we hear, as you've heard from me before, a wide range of leaders from all across Australia who have the vested interest in multiplying and church planting in our nation. And today we're joined by Matt Sparks, who along with his wonderful wife Tash has planted Anchor Church in Sydney. They are part of the Acts.19 network. I've had a fair bit to do with Matt, and I've just loved his heart for planting and his heart to want to be a church that plants churches. Matt, I'd love you just firstly introduce yourself, mate. Tell us a little bit about who you are, some of the journey of Anchor. Introduce yourself to people today.
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. Thanks for having me on. So yeah, obviously married to Tash. We've been married for almost 15 years. We have three little purple minions that run around and bounce around our house. Judah is nearly 10, Piper's 8, and Levi is nearly 4. So we're busy with the 3 kids. We live in pretty close to the inner city. So we live in Alexandria, which is just one or two stops from Central Station, really close to the centre of Sydney here, and have been living in the area for almost 9 years since we planted our church. So
incredible.
Yeah, that's us.
So
yeah.
And you know, just for those who don't necessarily know of the story of Anchor outside of Sydney, Anchor's become a relatively well-known church here in Sydney. But tell us some of your journey as you came from a local church. Being part of Acts.19, have been strongly influenced by that network in the really great and healthy ways. Just tell us about like some of the planting journey for Anchor, and even since what's happened, you know, over those 8 or 9 years that you guys have been able to go out planting 2 more sites.
Yes, it's important you qualify involvement with Acts.19 in the great and healthy ways. So I mean, people may not know, but I did 17 years of youth ministry before planting a church, and I think that foundation has been really significant for us. It's not like we decided to plant a church and had a few years' experience in ministry. I'd been working at a very large multi-ethnic church in the western suburbs of Sydney. Had been a youth pastor there for 10 years, and it was a church planting church itself. It was planted by our lead pastor, and we had planted multiple other churches and sites. And so church planting had always been a part of what we were involved with there. But in, I think about 2012, I was actually spending a lot of time leaning into some of the more missional guys in Acts.19. So the Soma guys, Jeff Vanderstelt and some of those crews. So I, at the time, approached our lead pastor and said, what do you think? Could we plant a church? And we went off and got assessed, and very quickly, we're just on this church planting trajectory. We had, I mean, just, you know, like to brag on my previous senior pastor, we decided that we wouldn't plant the brand of church that we'd been a part of for the last 10 years. And he very willingly supported us, sent us with 10 people and seed funding, $10,000 a year for 3 years. And it basically said to me, ask anyone who you want to join your team, and ask anyone you want from church for money. And so we felt incredibly supported and prayed for. They still pray for us very regularly. We felt incredibly blessed and supported by the guys at MBM at Ruddy Hill. Yeah, so in 2014, we started with a small team of people, 17 people in our little 2-bedroom apartment in Erskineville, praying that God would do a work in our city. A big part of our heart was we wanted to see revival. We wanted to see the lost come home. And we launched in May of 2014. So we're about to celebrate our 8th birthday this year.
Unreal.
And then, just kind of put our foot down from there. We just got busy doing church. It's pretty easy to talk about, you know, having a vision for church planting. Then you've actually got to make it happen and do it every single week. Easy to launch the first Sunday. You got to turn up the week after that and then do it every single week for the next 8 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, I'd love to hear more about what's happened since. But before we go any further, we had Adam Ramsey on a while back where I would hear a lot about Acts 29. Tell us, why Acts 29 for you? Like, what are some of those distinctives that have been really important? I know that as we've spoken elsewhere, assessment and opportunities to be part of something and a heart for multiplication and church planting has been really significant. Mm-hmm. But tell us more about that journey with Acts 29 as you guys went about Planting Anchor.
I think for me personally, Acts 29 has been a support network. It's friends who are doing the same thing in the trenches alongside you. And that's probably the most significant thing that we have personally received from Acts 29. Obviously, 829 has a strong focus on church planting, and we've had a vision for doing. So there's been a lot of resonance there with what 829 is about. But I think initially the things that attracted me to Acts 29 was a network of global church planters. I wanted to try and do something a little bit different. And I didn't know many missional people in Australia then. And it's clearly I just was ignorant because there were heaps of missional people in Australia. But for me, like a really big piece was the spirit-led value and missional value that Acts 29 has. So those are probably the two strongest values that drew me into the network alongside the relational, stuff that any network offers really. But so it's the missional stuff that was particularly compelling for me that we kind of wanted to lean into. Yeah.
That's great, Matt. Well, how about we kind of fast forward a bit to today, like over the last almost 8 years, like tell us some of that journey. How's it been? You guys have since in the process of planting your third site out of Anchor. Obviously you were seeded with that multiplication mindset in mind. Like, just tell us some of that journey over the last 8 years.
Yeah. Well, we the very first Sunday we spoke about the fact that we were going to plant a church, and it sounded ridiculous when you've got 17 people and you've not even planted a church yet. Like, we're going to plant other churches, but you're right. The vision was there from day one. It was a big part of what we wanted to see happen. So since day one, for every dollar that came in, we were setting aside 10% of our budget for church planting with a view for planting in the future. So yes, we've planted 2 churches in the last 2 years, but that has come on the foundation of years of preparing for that. It didn't just come out of a vacuum. So we've been casting vision for church planting, and I think I was hoping to find like a carbon copy replica of me that we could just plant out again. But they can just go plant themselves. They don't need a sending church to do it. So we had a pretty significant shift a few years ago, where we decided that we actually needed to train our own people. They were the people who got our DNA the best and knew what we were trying to do. And so we launched a church planting residency program in 2018, where we really intentionally tried to prepare some of our people to church plant in the next couple of years. So our first planter was Arnaldo Santiago Jr., who's down at Anchor Southwest. And him and another guy, James Wong, went through our residency, the first 2 guys to get plugged into the residency. So that's like a really intentional finishing school for us. We want our church planners to have, good, rich theological qualifications, but there's just a bunch of areas in leadership, church planting, missiology that we wanted to kind of round them off on. So that's been a big part of our journey of getting from, 17 people in a little apartment in 2014 to 3 churches across Sydney today. Intentionally investing in the next tier of leadership.
That's great. I think that's really significant, Matt, and even that kind of shift that you noticed around, where you are today, and of course, prayers that even more churches would be planted. while it's incredible to have a vision towards that, there's actually got to be some strategy that backs that up. And even that idea of setting aside resource, church planting residency, one of the greatest challenges I keep hearing within the Australian church is around the leadership pipeline and where are we getting our future planters from? Well, they aren't just going to show up overnight. There's actually somewhat of a strategic element to raising up those leaders. Which I think you've just highlighted brilliantly there, Matt. I wonder if you'd also, because as you know, I can imagine, and as we've shared outside of this recording, like there's a cost to that as well, right? Like there's moments where you're giving away your best, where you kind of know that you've got people with you for a time, and that while that sounds great as a slogan, it hurts as a leader. Why don't you just speak to some of like the hardship of that in this last season?
Yeah, I'm feeling it right now. I'm feeling the cost of it. And there have been times I'm like, is this really worth it? So our first church plant was Southwest. We sent them at the start of at the end of 2020, and they launched in 2021. And we sent around 30 people. And of those 30, we sent our best. So sent our best musicians, some of our best creatives, and sent our best preacher in Arnaldo as well. So it cost us significantly to be able to do that. And then more recently, sending our Northern Beaches church plant, I've sent, my next most senior staff member, James Dawson, one of the other elders, who he and his wife were with us since before day one. Like they were the first people to believe in our vision to join a church plant, and they're crazy enough to go again. And that has actually been a bit of a pattern. Like the people that were there the first time round, some of those people have gone to do it again. That hurts when the best go. So I've just finished a bit of a hiring frenzy this year and employed a whole new staff team here at City. But yeah, absolutely. And the cost is not just personnel and people. The cost is financial. So we have financially committed to seed funding our church plants over the first 3 years. And then there's an organizational cost, so that, the way that we're doing it, it makes things really complex. And so the complexity cost is there as well. So it's not just sending people, sending money, but then making your organization more complex sometimes, than it really needs to be. But absolutely. And if, I don't know, cost, maybe that's a reason why people don't plant churches, because it is too costly. But the benefit, the blessing, the impetus, the desperate need that our city has to plant more churches makes the cost worth doing.
That's awesome, Matt. And that kind of leads me to my next question. Like, if I was to guess from a distance, that would probably be one of the most challenging things about, the last season for you guys at Anchor. Talk to me about some of the great stories. Like, talk to me about, some of the moments where you just go, oh yeah, like, Lord, we've been on mission and we've seen those who are far away from you come to find, great hope in Jesus. I'd love to just hear from you maybe a story or two about what the Lord has done.
Yeah. The most recent one that I've been connected with, we're filming a story for Easter of a guy who came to faith during lockdown through our church. And it was all God. This is not like, it's not because of our strategy. It's not because of our giftedness. Like, this is literally one of those stories where, like, we did nothing. God did everything. This guy, and I guess a bit of a trigger warning for this story, but he was attempting to take his own life, lived in Maroubra, and he woke up on the floor of his kitchen and something hit him in the chest. He lives by himself. And he kind of came to and thought, who was that? No one else lives here. And something told him to search for Anchor Church online. So he got off the floor. Sorry, he went to hospital immediately. He went to hospital, but he wrote down Anchor Church everywhere so he wouldn't forget it. He wrote down Anchor Church and he came home. As soon as he got home, he Googled Anchor Church and turned up to one of our online church services. And he'd watched a few videos. We'd had a video of a guy who'd struggled with addictions in the past that he really resonated with. And so he's joining online, watching. And then one Sunday I was hosting, and I said, look, if you're watching and you're new, just connect with me, DM me on Instagram. And he did. We got chatting. I invited him to an Alpha course, and he attended Alpha. And we had the joy of baptizing him at the end of 2021. And man, Alec he has lived a rough life, and he's had a hard life. He's gone through a lot, and just to see the radical transformation in his life has been amazing. He's been clean and dry for almost 2 years now, and has got a job working for charity, providing a lot of secondhand clothing to all of the flood people in Lismore, northern New South Wales at the moment. So the transformation is incredible. And those are the moments that kind of make it all worth the cost and sacrifice and effort.
And
for sure.
just so everyone knows, that was all online, right? That all happened during lockdown.
Yeah, for the most part. He's obviously since been coming to church, but yeah, for that early days, it was online church, online Alpha.
Right.
Eventually turned up to an in-person gathering as a believer who never met in person before.
That's incredible.
So
one final question just to wrap up our time together. Particularly for you as a leader, and one that has experienced some of the costs that we talk about. And of course, it's easy to talk about this idea of planting churches when you're early on in the journey, but particularly when you're almost 8 years in now, like, how are you feeding yourself? Like, what are the things or the influences or the things that, apart from obviously communing in the Lord and abiding in the vine and all those wonderful, beautiful things, but like, what are the things that you are turning to in this season to kind of get vision for the next season? Keep pressing forward, keep pursuing this hope of planting more churches that would reach more people like that man that you just told us about.
Yeah. I think I've really intentionally tried to lean into more relational spaces outside of my networks and church. So I'm obviously in one of those groups with you, Charlie, which has been really helpful. Just other people in a similar position who get it and who are trying to do the same thing. And we're sharing best practice, and we're encouraging and praying for each other. So obviously receive a lot of that through Ep.19 and through some of these other networks that I'm a part of. I've intentionally tried to dip back into study in the last 2 years, maybe naively somewhat thought I could have a bit of time during successive lockdowns. So I'm doing a master's in missional leadership at the moment, which has been very stimulating. I just needed I needed something to force me to learn again and go a bit deeper. So the master's been really helpful. And then just podcasts. I don't know. I think everyone's into the podcast at the moment, but probably the things that have been most stimulating.
That's awesome, Matty. So I'm hearing, relationships, provoking, broader thought than even just the own circles that we roll in. I think that's a wonderful encouragement for anyone who might be listening, that sometimes we actually need to go searching beyond our own immediate context. I know that's definitely where I've definitely found, inspiration and fuel for what the Lord might be doing in me. Hey, Matty, we totally appreciate your time today, mate. I greatly admire you from a distance. And I just am greatly inspired, and hope that this would bless many as well as they're considering, what would it look like for the church that I might be leading or a part of or yet to plant, to actually have multiplication seeded in its DNA. And so we really appreciate you, mate. Thank you for your time today.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening. For more great resources, please head to our website at exponential.org.au.